everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, back with another Twitter thread. And if you are wondering why I look so white in the introduction to this one, it's because of the card on screen. Today I have posited a kind of difficult question for you on Twitter, so I really hope that you have done your homework and come to today's reading with something comprehensible instead of just posting Sea Monster of Theseus a whole bunch of times in the comments. Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have rotation, new cards have to be worth buying. This means there is a constant state of power creep, but oftentimes that power creep isn't just happening in a vacuum. Konami isn't printing stronger and stronger cards every set. Frequently, they're printing cards that deal very specifically with the previous metagame. As an example, here is Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon. This card was released when Pendulum decks and Burning Abyss decks were at the top tier tables. And as a result, it has two effects. One that prevents people from summoning more than one monster at once, a la Pendulums, and one that can negate the effects of monsters activated in the graveyard, just like every Burning Abyss. Frequently, you will get these extremely targeted cards meant to rotate the format on their own. This is not the only example, and hopefully we've got some more in the comments here. Evil Longyuan is just absolutely insane. So you can't actually see the name of this one because it's so shiny, but Sword Soul Sinister Sovereign Longyuan is an incredibly powerful card. It has two really good effects. If your opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can banish that monster and inflict 1200 damage to your opponent. And when your opponent activates a spell trap card or effect, you can banish that card, and if you do, inflict 1200 damage to your opponent. Now, you might notice that both of these effects are very good in a vacuum, but what they're really good against is the recently released Adventure line. The first effect deals with the token, or the Griffin Rider, and the second effect deals with the Fateful Adventure itself. Extremely targeted and extremely powerful. Nightmare Incarnation Edely was released at a time when people were U-linking, but unfortunately, it's one of those cards that just missed the mark. It was meant to beat the Goki Extra Link boards that people were building, but by the time this card was printed, we were all so sick of Goki Extra Link boards that they had just natively banned like 4 of the necessary cards to play that deck. This card, on summon, non-targeting, sends a card your opponent controls to the graveyard. Now, you might be wondering, what's the functional difference between sending a card and destroying a card? Surely this card would be just as playable if it destroyed a card on the field non-targeting. Well, there was a little card that was plaguing the format called Thunder Dragon Colossus, and it was absolutely impossible for many decks to out. As a result, Dingirsu represented a fantastic and phenomenal way for one of the top decks to finally take a matchup that had been giving it trouble and kick it in the shins repeatedly. It's probably the boring answer, but the Kaijus felt like a necessary evil during the era they were released. Yeah, this is a pretty clear target at tower-type monsters specifically. The one that was running rampant at the time was Apoclefort Towers, which of course prevents your opponent from doing just about anything while it is on the field. But Konami understood that that was not the only card they wanted to print that was unaffected by other cards' effects. To ensure that any of those individual cards never became too much of a problem, the entire Kaiju line was invented and is playable to a degree this year. So Sky Striker Ace Zeke was clearly printed to be an out to Thunder Dragon Colossus, which made the Thunder Dragon matchup nearly unwinnable for Sky Striker, unless they committed to sending a Widow Anchor off of Hayate and then adding it back with Kagari in order to take the Thunder Dragon Colossus before going for their search spells. It's very hard to set up. Zeke was a really easy way to get it off the field, but by the time it was printed, we had banned Colossus. This is a fun little thought experiment. I disagree with this assertion, but this Twitter user says there's an argument to be made that Cosmo Dark Destroyer was made to force Burning Abyss out of the metagame. Dark Destroyer specifically can't be targeted by card effects, which makes it very difficult for BA to remove. All of their removal is targeted, and it's too big to beat over with a lot of BA monsters. So you would think that this would be like the hard counter to the archetype. It didn't work. In practice, this card did warp deck building for Burning Abyss pilots, but it did not present a problem. If you were on the Kaiju variant, which was very popular, it's the one I took to Nats that year, you could use Beatrice to send an interrupted Kaiju Slumber on your opponent's turn, then banish it from the graveyard in order to add a Kaiju to your hand and tribute over it on your turn. If you were not on the Kaiju version, you could make F-Zero Utopic Future and steal this card. And if you were on the Phantom Knight version, you had a myriad of ways to get a monster to 3,000 attack points and just crash, outvaluing your opponent over the course of a couple of turns. Perfect example. El Shaddai Anoilitus was the Water Shadow, which meant that it could be made with a water monster during Nekroz format. When it's fusion summoned, neither player can special summon monsters from the hand or graveyard using spell trap effects, and you'll recognize that for a ritual archetype, this card is the end of the game. That said, it was not enough. Necros played through this like it was absolutely nothing. Exciton Knight was absolutely meant to counter the way that decks were being built in like 2013, 2014. So players had gravitated towards one of two deck styles, depending on what sort of deck they were playing. Either a big bungus combo deck that made 1,000,000 monsters, or a big bungus back row deck that set 1,000,000 cards. Exciton Knight was a low investment monster that threatened both of those setups. Unfortunately, it became extremely powerful once people realized you could play it in both of those strategies as well. So Ultimate Slay is not out in the TCG. This is a POT release. This card reads, send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, then target one monster your opponent controls with the same type, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, Pendulum, or Link, shuffle it into the deck. Your opponent cannot activate monster effects in response to this card's activation. This card is almost specifically designed to beat a metagame that consists of exactly Splight and Tearlament. We will see if it is successful. Yep, Cyber Dragon is a great example. None of the format threats in GOAT can compete with a 2100 attack point monster. With Scapegoat hit on the list that postdates GOAT format, Cyber Dragon absolutely contested any normal summon or any defensive option that you were doing, demanded immediate removal. It was just fantastic. This is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but yes, the most recently released Beasted and Bisted cards all have the effect that they can special summon themselves from the hand by quick effect banishing a dark or light monster from either grave. These are being released at a time when the arguable best deck in the OCG is Tearlament, a series of dark monsters that absolutely must be in the graveyard in order to perform their combos. Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King, a fantastic example as well. Dryden Pop Your Normal Summon was such a powerful play during this period that they figured they had to absolutely present to duelists not only an archetype that pluses if you activate an effect while your opponent has committed to their normal summon. The spell trap cards, if you chain a Dryden in response, get to eat a piece of material off your opponent's side of the field, and the monsters get to plus themselves, but also a boss monster that is completely immune to it as well. I mean, this card was made to counter Gladiator Beast, but if it was pushed, it probably would have had more than 1,200 attack. Exosister is a great response to this. It just ended up being a deck in the right place at the right time. A series of monsters that care about monsters that activate and summon themselves from the graveyard in a format where the top two decks are doing that, and their best monster being released in the same set as the rest of those archetypes. Borolo Dragon is a fantastic example. At the time this card was released, the best boss monster decks could climb to was Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon has a couple of effects. It can, if it attacks an opponent's monster, gain attack equal to that monster's attack, provided that monster, I believe, is level 5 or higher. Well, Link monsters don't have levels. What's more, it would still crash with Borolo Dragon, except Borolo Dragon has an effect that allows you to decrease the attack of a monster by 500 attack and defense. Usually, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon could negate it, but Borolo Dragon, for some unbelievable reason, cannot be responded to. This card was specifically made to beat exactly that, and boy, did it do a great job, putting a ton of DDD players' hopes directly in the dirt after the deck was released. Satellar Knight Constellar Diamond,
a card that would bolster Satellar Knight to combat the Burning Abyss Shaddoll meta,
actually literally reads your opponent is not allowed to activate Shaddoll Fusion. There were so many cards during this period designed to prevent that interaction from happening. It didn't matter. Tellers were still not good enough. I mean, this was pushed, of course, but it is also really poorly thought out. You know, you can play this in Pendulum, right? Against Pendulum, for Pendulum, around Pendulum. Yeah, so this card was released at a time when some of the top decks were Cosmo, Burning Abyss, and generally a bunch of monsters that floated. Ignister Prominence, the Blasting Draco Slayer, was an inclusion in Pendulum decks that allowed you to shuffle one card on the field into the deck. Non-targeting, so it got around Cosmos, shuffles into the deck, so it got around floating effects. One of the most targeted synchro monsters that I've ever seen, with the exception of the one that I posted. Adding one onto the pile, released during a format with strong BA and Shaddoll representation. This was also one of the cards that made people realize what happens to Pendulum monsters under macro, because Clees were running around at this time too. This card pretty much exactly says your opponent's going to be adding cards from their deck to their hand, so prevent them from doing that, and your opponent's going to be plussing out of the graveyard, prevent them from doing that. Unfortunately, Hero was never anything more than a rogue playable strategy during this period, though this card is specifically targeted at the top meta decks. Yeah, I feel bad for Cosmo. After those cards were released, they just revealed like 12 different cards that gave every single deck an out to their monsters. Utopia the Lightning is made to prevent your opponent from activating the effects of cards in the damage step, and it goes up to 5,000, so it can clear even the largest Cosmo ships. Extremely targeted at a deck that has received more targeted hate than maybe any other one under the sun. So that's that. As you can see, sometimes it's not the ban list that pulls us out of frustrating formats, it's Konami themselves, printing cards that absolutely answer the top tier meta threats. And in a format we're about to get Splight, Tearlament, and Exorcister, you better get printing. Do a funny post-outro bit about predicting what the next push card will be. It'll be Performapal Banger Bussy.
Meet the Bussies. The Bussy Bunch. A brand new series premieres Tuesday, January 22nd at 9 only on TLC.